This fall will be the 10th anniversary of the publication of Mouse, which I consider a true American masterpiece. It was written over 13 years by Artie Spiegelman, who's our next guest, who's a titan in the world of underground comics, and whose success has perhaps made him not too much of an underground figure anymore. So how do you feel, Arthur, now that you've come up out of the subway into the skyscraper world of big time Manhattan?
I keep getting thrown out of the skyscraper once every few weeks, so I still feel underground somehow.
Well, now let's let these people who don't know, unfortunately, what Mouse is about, what it is. Well, I'll tell them quickly, because I know you're a somewhat modest guy. What Mouse is it's what I guess maybe Truman Capote would call a nonfiction novel. That is, by using his cartoon techniques and appropriating the Nazi idea that Jews were vermin, depicted often as rats and mice, in fact, Spiegelman has created a remarkable work. It's the story of his father, and it's told through interviews that the son, who's also a mouse, who smokes cigarettes constantly, and is often frustrated by his father, who by now, when we meet him, is a crotchety old guy. But as we get to know him through the story, he becomes this extraordinarily heroic figure. In fact, I would submit one of the great heroic figures in all of 20th century literature, perhaps literature of all time, because he, like Odysseus, is this extraordinarily resourceful guy who is not going to be outdone by bad luck, by trouble, by genocide. And the remarkable thing about it is when you pick up the book, you say, this can't work. This guy can't depict Jews as mice and get away with this. But he brings it off, and in about 5 or 10 pages, you're trapped in the tale. And when the first volume came out and was done, everybody was frustrated. And then we all were very happy when the second volume came out. So now how well has it sold now?
I don't keep close tabs, but I think it's about, each book has sold about 500,000 copies, and it's out in about 18 different languages.
Now, are you happy with the response people have had to it?
Well, sure. I mean, I never expected it to have much of a readership. I thought I'd be publishing it myself when I finished, you know. And about the only downside is that I now feel like I have this 5,000-pound mouse chasing me everywhere I go, you know.
Now, there was some controversy, wasn't there, when the book came out as to whether or not it was going to be on when it became a bestseller, as to whether it was going to be...
Well, it appeared on the fiction list as a bestseller. And so I perversely wrote a letter to the Times, which I would have done no matter which side of the list that it appeared on, and wrote a letter saying, I understand that my mice present a problem in taxonomy for you, but David Duke would be very glad to know that what my father lived through is considered fiction. Perhaps you could reconsider. And then it did appear on the nonfiction list. They switched it over because the publisher insisted on its existence as nonfiction. The funniest thing that happened was behind the scenes, one editor was outraged. And he said, well, let's go down to Spiegelman's house, and if a giant mouse answers the door, we put it on nonfiction.
Oh, I talked to that editor.
Oh, yeah?
I talked to that editor, yes. I talked to that editor. I heard that said. Now, do you believe that that you have another story that's extraordinary in you? I mean, I know that's a rough question.
I don't know. I mean, you know, this was such extended birth pang getting this thing to happen, like you said, 13 years, you know, that I'm at the early stages of just poking around for something that's worth contracting this long-term disease, like going in for a book and coming out 7 or 8 or 9 years later. So I've been doing a lot shorter hits, one after the other, and taking notes on a couple of projects in the hopes that one of them will flower. And there's one thing that I've been kind of researching and thinking about that we talked about before that I got real excited about, but I have a very difficult time finding my way in totally. And it's about America's greatest black cartoonist, actually, named Ollie Harrington.
You think he's better than George Harriman?
Well, I knew you'd bring up George Harriman. George Harriman's sort of a little bit like Anatole Broyard or something, right? He never sort of like, he wasn't a race man,
right?
You know? And Yeah, he had some Creole blood in him, it seems, based on his birth records. But it's kind of odd. You look at his work, and he's drawing the same minstrel faces that the other cartoonists around him are drawing. And it's only in one kind of subtext where you start looking at Crazy Cat and can start seeing this as maybe having something to do with identity and blackness, maybe. Arguably, you can make the case.
I thought essentially what he was trying to do was just that he was another one of those people who was overwhelmed, as were the people who made the silent films, by silent film comedies, by just the anarchic wackiness of the United States. I mean, that was essentially what I thought Harriman's focus was, and I didn't think he was that concerned about.
No, what's really great is he has this totally open-ended metaphor, right? It's just like a cat who loves to get hit by bricks. When this cat gets hit by a mouse, the cat takes it as a sign of love. The dog, the policeman doesn't understand and jails the mouse and puts him in a jail made of bricks, you know? So it's open-ended enough to absorb any interpretation, which is its genius, you know? That was able to go on for 30 or 40 years on this kind of simple variations on that theme.
Now, now, at this point, going back to Mouse, at this point, do you consider Mouse a work of nonfiction, or do you consider it, as I was saying earlier, which I think is one of the best, this may be the best proof that I know of for Truman Capote's nonfiction novel idea, that because these things are so much your inventions, the way that they come to life visually, however well you have, and the fact that you have edited this tale and these words, and the structure that you give it is not the straight linear structure of somebody's life from point A to point B.
No, I kind of like living in the space between categories in general. You know, I don't know if just having to deal with it as being comics is already a problem, whether it's going to be fiction comics or nonfiction comics, already puts it in this kind of unusual place where nobody knows where to put it in the bookshop. You know, it ends up sometimes in pet care because it picks animals. You know? And the book I did after, which was illustrating a Prohibition-era naughty poem from the 20s, got put in Judaica because Mao's ended up there on occasion, you know. To me, it's sort of not an important question because it seems to me that there's no such thing as unmitigated nonfiction unless you just leave a video camera somewhere and just see what happens in front of it, you know, like that everything is shaped and edited, and once that happens, you're already dealing to one degree or another with fiction, and then it's a matter of how good an artist you are, even if you're the kind of artist you are as a reporter.
Well, now, after you've had a character who's as complex as the father figure in this, whose complexity, I would suggest, equals that of anybody else who's appeared in any books in this century. I mean, this is a guy who's stingy on the one hand, he's overbearing. His attempt to keep his wife alive during the constant pursuit by the Nazis becomes this extraordinary love affair. His ability to constantly improvise a way to survive regardless of what the situation is. For instance, when he's in Auschwitz and the guy says, "Can you fix shoes?" He says, "Of course I can." And he doesn't know how to fix shoes, but he figures out very quickly how to do it. And then he ends up getting to the barbed wire fence and getting a word over to his wife and keeping her spirits up. And building these building hiding places before they're finally captured, and living in barns and doing all of these different kinds of things. And then, of course, he ends up the hero with his heroine in the United States, becomes an overbearing husband, and she commits suicide. Mm-hmm. So he's kind of I guess he's as close to Hemingway's Winner Take Nothing as.
Well, also I got to say that one of the reasons he wins is just sheer unmitigated luck. Like, there's people who are far less resourceful than him that managed to survive, including my mother, Anja, who, after they aren't in touch anymore, she still goes through 6 or 8 months of concentration camp without any help, and somehow comes out on top in spite of a kind of strong death wish. Vladek, for all his resourcefulness, if the war had lasted another 6 months, could easily have died of typhus, if nothing else. you know? So it's much more complex than that. To me, like, he acted and behaved with an eye toward what would help him survive. He had a very strong life force moving through him to make that thing happen. But so much of it could have easily ended up another way that it was important to me not to turn him into some kind of caricature, if you'll pardon the word in the context of comics, but where somehow his doing something is, he's the agent of his own survival in that sense, you know, because it could have easily turned out, and it did for millions of other people, differently.
Well, there's that great, there's that great moment of tragic wisdom when he sees one of the guys who had demanded the family jewels to protect the family, and he sees him dead in a wagon, and he says, "Oh, the poor guy." And then the son, says, "What do you mean the poor guy? He ripped all of you off for the jewels." And he says to him something of the fact, "He could have taken the jewels and not helped us."
Basically, yeah, that's right.
You know, I mean, so it's that kind of, it's that
morality depends on what's happening,
right? And it was, you know, that was such a great insight because, of course, the guy, he didn't have to help you at all, and so or help the characters at all. And so I think that's the reason. I think that's one of the reasons why people are so taken by it, because there's absolutely no sentimentality in the book either. I mean, he's not depicted as saintly, and he's not depicted as the worst guy in the world.
Well, that was why it was, like, some people took issue with me about one sequence that takes place in the second book where Francoise, my wife, character in the book, and Art and Vladek, my father, are in a car, and Francoise picks up a black hitchhiker, at which point Vladek goes nuts and is cursing in Polish through the entire ride, and then when the hitchhiker gets out of the car, he says, "Have you gone crazy or something? You could have stolen our groceries," you know? Now, it was important not as a way of pegging Vladek as a racist. What was important there was to indicate that one shouldn't think that suffering ennobles, because what Francois says in that sequence is something like, how could you of all people feel this way when you were the victim of something similar in Germany? And Vladek's response is, "Oh, blacks and Jews, it's not to compare." And the point of that really had to do with indicating that all suffering does is it causes pain. It doesn't create ennobled figures.
Well, I'm being told that we have to sign off, Arthur. And I would like to say to the viewers this evening, if you want to experience some authentic American genius, read Mouse, volumes 1 and 2, and I think that you will get a human story with as much variety, as much complexity, as much depth of feeling, and as much insight into the human condition as you will from any other book written since World War II. Thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you very much, Stanley.
Thank you. We'll be right back with James Carter, one of the most talked about young musicians in the jazz renaissance. Thank you.